Hey, good morning. So this is an example. I don't have audio, so I'll try to talk loud. If you can't hear me, just tell me. It should come on in a bit. Maybe they'll send someone out. Make sure this other one is working. Yeah, I think the recording thing is working. Hey, so this is a really good response to an essay style question. You know, the essay questions were like 10 points. It's like 1/10 of the grade on the midterm, right? So worth putting a little bit of time in. Realistically, with an open-ended, open book kind of exam like this, you would have time to do something like this. Although this is doctored, no one person came up with this. I kind of pulled from a couple of answers and I added a little bit myself. This is, I would say, is an excessively thorough answer to a very complicated, really kind of difficult question. It's a complicated, difficult question that you should be able to answer shortly. That's an example of one way to approach it. There's, you know, when you're dealing with an essay question like this, it's really important to have enough background to understand the details, but then to have enough organizational and contextual understanding to be able to organize it into a really coherent answer. And I didn't see a lot of that. Not your fault. We're going to get there. So there were two parts to the question. The first part had, you know, a question about the spring runners. And the second part of the first part was about differences between springers and the other groups. And, you know, baked into that question is like an unstated premise, like, why the fuck is this important? Who cares about springers and the differences? Well, it's related to a larger evolutionarily cool idea, the portfolio effect, which is a way of bet hedging, which is a way of ensuring survival in a chaotic, geologically disrupted, periodically glacially inundated landscape, you know, that's punctuated by mega droughts on occasion, right? How does the portfolio effect, how do these different life history strategies fit in with that context? That's what I really wanted to know. This question gets at some of it. And then the second part is like, you know, what can we do? You know, conservation. That's a little more straightforward. But the first part was really big. And here, this is an attempt at it. It's certainly not the only attempt. It's a little too wordy. It's a little too, you know, focused on certain aspects of it. But there's a lot of different ways to answer it that would get full credit. And the key, and we're going to have time to work on this, the key is to try to synthesize it and bring an insight. You want to bring an insight to the data. And I'm going to come back to this idea in a little bit. Let me just tell you where I'm going to go for the rest of the day here. We'll keep things moving along. We're going to do the midterm postmortem. I'm going to talk about the biogeography. Hey, thanks for coming. I mean, I'm loud enough where they can probably hear me, but it's nice to have a little bit of backup with the mask. I pushed all the buttons. I pushed the wrong buttons. I pushed all these. I turned these things on up here. And can you hear me? I hear my voice echoing back. That's it, man. That's what your expertise is. I just need like a huge arrow with a piece of yarn attached to it and points to the button. Thank you very much. So the midterm postmortem, right? And then I'm going to talk about the biogeography of California a little bit, which is really something that's related to the portfolio effect. And also the trouble that you had answering that question that I assumed was like, you know, pretty not basic, but available. On Wednesday, online only, is an interview with Peter Moyle. Peter Moyle developed this class. He actually invented the biogeography of California fishes. He came out of the 1970s when really there was maybe one other person that knew anything about the native species in California. I had a long conversation with him on Thursday, I think, and we recorded our interview. And so I want to share that with you. It's all online. I would have loved to have had Peter in the class, but he's almost 80 years old, and I really didn't want to expose him to you. No offense, right? So we sat down at my house and we talked for about an hour. It goes over 50 minutes. So I guess that extra 20 minutes is like homework, okay? If if you enjoy it, keep watching. If not, you'll probably get away with it. There'll be a participation question though, asking you about some aspect of it, okay? Today, there's a participation credit as well. On Friday, my friend Carson Jeffries is coming to talk about floodplain fishes. He spent time both working on the Yolo bypass where Jacob Katz works, but also he spent half a year in Brazil on the Amazon. And so I think I've asked him to focus on Amazonian fishes and floodplains down there. And I think that's he's a great character too. I think that'll be a really exciting lecture for you. And I feel like I have the week off or something. I only have to give one lecture this week. Yeah. Excuse me, not on Wednesday. It's going to be online only, okay? Because there's really no point in coming in and having me play a video of me and Peter talking. Check it online. Friday will be in person. Carson wants to be here, so that'll be fun. Okay. Let me dig into the midterm. So here's the curve. I called it a curve. It's not a curve. It's a distribution. I did not curve the exam. The average grade, about high C, low B. That's about right. I think it's about right. It was challenging enough to make you work a little bit for the B. Most people, got right on the margin right there. As you can see, it was easy. It was pretty easy to get a B, and it was pretty hard to get an A, as it turns out. You all just nailed the multiple choice, which led me to two conclusions. One, it's lame to have an open book test and a multiple choice exam. Two, I don't make very good multiple choice questions, and so I didn't get a good distribution. Or three, you all just are born into multiple choice questions, a lifetime of multiple choice questions. And you bombed the short answer and long answer. You just, oh, I thought the first part was like a breeze for you. Yeah, I know, I understand. Next time I'll flip it. We'll talk more about what I'll do for the final, okay? One of the way I set it up had some challenges and some opportunities, but I'm gonna try and make it more streamlined for the final. So let's just talk about bombing it. So I hate this graph, right? I hate this table. I gave you this table, right? And you all, when you're going to answer this question, about 90% of the class went to the table, they looked it up, and they described in lurid detail all the migration periods, the peak migration, the spawning, the peak spawning, the emergence, and the juvenile stream residency, and they did it in a sentence form. And they summarized all these things. And I don't give a rat's ass about that. Nobody cares because it's in the table and because we have Google. And so we can look it up. What you can't find on Google is why and how it works, and the fact that Springer. This is this lightning streak here is not lightning. It's a main stem of the river. It's a tributary, and it's the headwaters. Did you get that? So the thing with springers is they come up in the spring, just like their name, when there's lots of water from snowmelt. And they travel up in the summer and they find the highest point they can to hang out in those plunge pools where there's a little bit of elevation, but probably because of when they decided to migrate, not enough water to get all the way up. They hang out in the cold plunge pools and they wait all summer. And then when it starts raining again in the fall, they make a mad dash up, they drop the kids off, and they die. And then the kids hatch in that, in the winter to spring period, and they make a decision based upon environmental conditions, whether to bolt out or whether to over summer. If there's a lot of rain, if there's a lot of snow melt, they might over summer because conditions are good. And if it's a drought, they're going to get the hell out because ocean conditions might be better. They're playing the lottery. They're buying, they buy tickets for staying in the river. They buy some tickets for going out. Some will do different things in the same year. But that's how they're hedging their bets. And that's what I really wanted you to do, to give me something like that. When are they coming up about? Where are they hanging out? Where do they go when they spawn? And what happens to the kids? That's what I was really looking for in that. And it was hard to do. And I just want to use that to talk a little bit about your job prospects. It's so cruel, I know, but I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be kind. So what are fisheries employers looking for according to this article in Fisheries Biology or Fisheries peer-reviewed journal, scientific journal, that fisheries biologists, they're looking for critical thinking and oral communication skills. They're looking for writing skills. They want to know that you can play in a team. And then look down. Let's see, somewhere, oh, math and stats. Look, math and stats is like halfway down. Population dynamics, all the stuff that you spend all this time learning. They want it, it's really important, but it's not like the top stuff. They want you to be able to integrate stuff. Like, they want you to take technical stuff and integrate it into an organized way of thinking. Critical thinking, that's what I was hoping to get from those long answer questions. And so this is kind of funny to me, because when you graduate, same paper, the students and the faculty think that we're just nailing critical thinking skills. And the employers are like, what the fuck? What's going on here? You know, you guys are, because we want to think that we're doing really good work. Swearing a lot today. I think I'm just tired. I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. There's a real disconnect between, you know, what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing. And, you know, I have to tell you that I think that it's not my fault and it's not the university's fault. I think it's this guy's fault. W, he started a 20-year war. That's you know, that was a strike against him. And he also implemented the No Child Left Behind Act, which was in 2001. And you all were born right around that. And when you entered school, they were testing you with multiple choice questions nonstop. Every single grade, every single level, you got these stupid ass multiple choice questions. And you hated it. And I have a kid and she hates it. We opted her out. It's so dumb. The war ended, but the testing goes on. You know, it's still there. And it's a legacy of stupidity. It was supposed to integrate opportunities, or it was supposed to integrate people from different opportunities and different levels to test and have measurable outcomes so that we could apply resources to groups that weren't getting what they needed. And it just didn't do that. Instead, it created a whole infrastructure of testing. And the irony of it is that to get into UC Davis, you no longer have to test. You don't need SATs anymore because it's valueless, right? So as a result, you're all really good at multiple choice questions and you suck at long answer. And it's his fault. But the truth is, it's actually this guy's fault too. Because I know it's scary. I was at the Whole Earth Festival, which has been canceled for 2 years. I found those years. So it's also my fault though, because I left out some really critically important stuff for you. And my problems began about 50 million years ago. And the reason that it's critical now is because 50 million years ago, California started the process of becoming assembled. And I left this out. So let me address it now. This is going to take us into bioregionalism and hopefully address the issue of how we approach integrating knowledge. You know, the last thing I want to say about that before I get off my old soapbox is like these large lecture style classes are a really ineffective way for you to learn critical thinking skills and how to do this stuff. And the reason that we're doing it is because the California State Legislature has progressively cut the budget for every student that comes into UC. There's less funding available. The university gets private donations to build buildings that hold lecture halls that have the names of donors on them, formerly successful UC students, and they slam you into a lecture hall of 150 or 300 or whatever. It's a terrible way to like develop these thinking skills. And you know, you're at a premier university, right? This is the top public university in the world. And yet the lectures are failing on that level. So what's the best way to do it at UC Davis, just while we're talking about it, is to get in a lab, because that's where we really excel. You know, research opportunities, You don't get them anywhere else in the world like you do at UC Davis. You don't get it at the Ivies. You don't get it, I mean, at University of California, I should say. You don't get it at the Ivies like this. You don't get it in the four-year colleges. You know, you see that the UCs are just known for this. So to compensate for the failure of the lecture process at the university, get yourself in a lab and also write as often as you can and take on challenges, write a senior thesis, write papers, and practice doing the stuff that I'm going to practice with you here in the next few days to get you up to speed at least a little bit. You can also demand it of your department. You can say, you know what, this class should have a lecture, this class should have sections, it's too big. Why aren't we having sections where we discuss and write and have individual TAs that we're working with? And because it's like it used to be 80 students and now it's 150. Now I'm done. That's stuff for you to talk about. I'm going to tell the department as well. And then I'll be done for 10 years of teaching. I guess this is it. Just because I get to teach once every 10 years. Okay, now back to the Middle Eocene. 500 million years ago, there was no California. It just didn't exist. But there were things afoot that were going to create it. And basically, the western edge of the North America plate was migrating west, and it was basically overtopping what was the Farallon plate. The Farallon plate, which is mostly disappeared today. The Farallon plate and the Pacific plate. And the edges of these tectonic plates, which are big flat chunks of earth that are floating across the surface of the magma that constitutes the deep inside parts of the earth. The oceanic plates are heavier. They're made of heavier materials, which is why they're deep and they have water over them. And the terrestrial plates are made of more silicaceous materials. They're lighter and they float higher. So you get the terrestrial stuff and you get the oceanic stuff, and they were colliding. And about 30 million years ago, the Pacific plate hit the edge of the North American plate, and it started subducting underneath it. And as it did that, there was a spreading center between the Pacific plate and the Farallon plate. The spreading center is where the Earth's crust is really thin and new terrain is being created. So magma is burping up in that center, that crack in the Earth's surface. And it's very thin. The magma chamber is really close behind it. It's a really active, dynamic, energetic spot. And that spreading center got subducted underneath California. And when that happened, all hell broke loose on the landscape. One thing is that the process of subduction, which you can see, let me get my marker out. So the process of subduction began along this margin here, which is pretty much, that's California. And it continued about 10 million years ago until we pretty much subsumed that massive slice of the Pacific plate or of the Farallon plate and broke it up into two smaller plates. The Cocos plate down south off Mexico, the San Juan de Fuca plate, which is up north. Up in north, they still have a lot of subduction going on, a lot of tectonic activity related to that, as they do for down south in Mexico. But along California coast here, that motion of subduction ended and it changed to a transform fault, a strike slip fault. So it's moving sideways to each other instead of underneath. And that had important implications for the kind of tectonically active land, for the features of the landscape. But I mostly want to talk about how that process, what that process of subduction did. Again, as the North American plate overran the Farallon plate and swallowed the mid-ocean ridge or the spreading center, it basically, that thermally active chamber of magma got moved under what was becoming the state of California. And here's another way of looking at it. So here's the subduction pattern as the spreading center moved down underneath the crust. The magma felt like it needed to go somewhere, and it goes up. And so there began this period of volcanism occurred. And that volcanism created these emerging volcanic mountains. And underneath them, there was this giant batholith of slowly cooling magma that formed into granite. Volcanic stuff like you see on like, gardens and stuff like that, that's stuff that gets vomited out into the air and it cools really quickly. Granite's the same stuff, but it cools really slowly. As California, this landscape emerged up out of the ocean, we had these volcanics up on top, the proto-Sierra Nevada, and below it, we had hiding out the modern Sierra Nevada, this granite stuff that you see when you go up to Yosemite now. At the same time, on the very edge of where the oceanic crust, where the Pacific plate was, or excuse me, the Farallon plate was going underneath the North American plate, you had this rising mountain range coming up above the surface of the ocean with this, it was basically scraping, kind of like when you eat Oreos, you scrape up the good stuff and eat it when you're a kid. It's scraping the top layers of these sedimentary rocks, forming what we call this really crazy structure, the Franciscan complex. It's a really complicated melange of materials because it's been scraped and pushed and uplifted. But in the process of doing that, this shape that you might recognize as the cross-section of California began. Here it's all below sea level still, but this is going to emerge. The Franciscan complex became the Coast Range. The Great Valley sequence was the valley in between that and these volcanic proto-Sierras. And, whoops, as a result, you got the development of California through this compression where those volcanic mountains rose up. This is my volcanic mountain here. And then you got the, because of volcanism, and then on the coast, you got these mountains that are the result of compression and scraping and got pushed up. And then erosion started to occur. And all those sediments on top of the volcanoes, these volcanics, they all washed down and they became the Great Valley, the Central Valley, which is why we have these incredibly rich soils here, extraordinarily deep, that are basically volcanics. And that left the Sierra Nevada that we know today intact. You can still see those volcanoes or that volcanic terrain when you drive up towards like Yosemite. You go through these really narrow river canyons. And if you look up, there's these table mountains, these very flat ridges above you. On the very tops of those, it's all volcanic, which is really strange to think about because now you're at the bottom of this upside down landscape almost. So, so that's the basic process of California. And then once I talked about how subduction occurred and then it turned into a transform fault. You don't need to know all the technical things about this, but just the gist of it. Once that compression stopped, there was this relaxation of pressure. So it went from compression to tension, and that essentially an extending process. And when that occurred, the chunks of land that you see like right here, different blocks started pulling apart. And as the blocks pulled apart, the stuff in the middle, like between two floaty blocks, the stuff in the middle pulled apart, a fault formed, and the bottom dropped out. And the bottoms are called grabens, and the ridges are called horst, graben and horst. That's what forms the Great Basin, this entire area over here, which is also part of California. You get these basically from the Sierras to almost to Salt Lake City. You drive through valley and ridge and valley and range and valley and range. And it's all because there are these pulling apart, the land is pulling apart, still doing it, pulling apart, and the middle of these valleys drop down out of it. And on the western edge, the Sierra Nevada block, which had, was basically this solid block of granite, which was kind of oblong in shape, like you see here. This thing is kind of floating on the surface of on the earth, and it started to tilt because things that float that are odd shaped like that tilt until they kind of find a balance where the two edges are more or less equivalent. On the west side over here, you have this shallow sloping terrain that goes up to the crest of the Sierra Nevada. And on the east side, you have a really dramatic slope. And if you've gone up 80 and driven over the pass, you'll see this. You get up, it takes you like an hour, hour and a half to get up to the ridge, and then all of a sudden you drop down to the Nevada side, and boom, you're at the bottom and you're looking back at a mountain range. That's the modern Sierra Nevada. And that's what we're seeing here. Instead of a block, the block is buried underground, kind of like that. And that became the landscape upon which the river system, I'm taking it back to fish, the river system developed that forms the bioregions or the ecogeography that I want to talk about today. And just so you have a little more context in real life, and you see, this is out in the Great Basin actually, but when you see ridges like this, and they sort of have a tilt to them, see that? The face of the ridge is kind of like at a 60-degree angle, a 45-degree angle there. It's because they're the edge of a block that is tilted over like that, and they're leaning against each other. And then you get these this is just an overview of a particularly fabulous Grabenhorst. This is the Grabener Valley of the Owens Valley. And then you can see on either side, you don't really see the you don't see the asymmetry of it, but you can see that all along the edge of these mountains, there's basically faults that are all through these because that valley floor dropped down below it. And the same thing's on the other side. So we have faults going this direction on this side and faults going on that direction on that side. And in short, that became the basis for the landscape that we know of as California, but which probably, if you're like me, you've explored maybe a tiny little bit. And we've all been trapped for 2 years in COVID when we expected to get out and graduate from high school and go and do wild things. So, it could be that maybe your geography is a little bit delayed. And so I'm trying to catch you up and tell you all the cool places that you need to go explore now. So what we have, this is a kind of high relief map of California. We're down here, well, a little bit north of there. We're right there in Davis. And then this is the Sacramento River running up through the middle of the Great Valley. And this is the San Joaquin River running down here. And then this is along this region from the peaks of the Sierras down to the valleys, this gentle slope that was riven by a series of rivers that connect to the San Joaquin and the Sacramento. And that landscape basically moves 40, maybe as much as 60% of the water that hits California comes through the Sacramento San Joaquin Valley system. And so in this, I think you can see a little more clearly what those river systems are. And let me just advance it. Okay, cool. So, so now we're going from that geography to the hydrography of the landscape. And the place that I just told you about, that we talked a lot about, is the Great Valley, because we live there. And it's this region here. It's connected all the way to the top of the Sacramento. Remember the McCloud River? McCloud River is right up there. And it goes all the way down into the San Joaquin and then drains out through the gate. That's the Sacramento San Joaquin Basin, or if you want the region, the bioregion. Up here is the Klamath River up in Northern California. You can see this is the Klamath right here. It extends very far up. It goes up into a terminal lake up here. It's connected to the Trinity River, which runs down around here. That's a separate province. Province is actually the appropriate word I think we'll use. That's the second province, the Klamath province. Below the Klamath are a series of rivers, the Mattole, the Eel River, the Russian River, which is a little bit of an anomaly, Redwood Creek. That's the North Coast province. South of the Bay Delta, from Monterey all the way down to Los Angeles, is the South Coast province of warm water creeks and rivers. On the east side of the Sierra here, this is the Great Basin province. The Great Basin province is unique in that it doesn't run to the ocean everywhere. Those Grabens and Horsts formed these unique valleys where the water flowed into the middle, and as the glaciers from 10,000 years ago began to subside, or recede is a better word, they formed these massive lakes. And under the changing climate, most of them dried up. But of course, you know of some. The Great Salt Lake is the remnant of, there's many rivers ringing it, and they go to this terminal basin. Also, in California, related to California, we have the Walker Creek, which goes out into Walker Lake over here. There's the Truckee River, which starts at Tahoe and goes down into Pyramid Lake. And there's of course Mono Lake, which you might have visited. All of these are very, very salty because they don't get any exchange. Water, takes all the salts and materials from the soil. It takes it down into these lakes. It evaporates. They become increasingly salinized. When they disappear, you get these massive, gorgeous salt flats that extend for miles around you. And as you're driving across Nevada, it's something that you can see quite commonly all the way over to Utah and the Rockies. The other province is the Colorado River province, which is right down here. Colorado River runs right through the tail end of California there. And so we claim some of that as our own. And there's a number of desert fishes and whatnot that are related to that province there. Those are the main provinces of California. And here's another way of looking at it. I gave you an assignment to read tonight, if you would, which is chapter 1 of Moyle's Inland Fisheries. Excuse me, the Inland Fishes of California. And if you check that out, he describes these in a little more detail that I may or may not have time to get to today, but none of the clocks are working. I got some time. So these are the six main basins. And what I want to come back to is at least for starters here, is the main basin that we've really been working with, which is the Sacramento-San Joaquin, or Great Valley Basin. And there's a series of major rivers that have made California, because they've been so critical, one, to the endemism, that is the high diversity of fishes in California, and two, because they're major contributors to the society that we have today. The structures of dams and water moving infrastructure they're the reason that we're all living here, because we basically moved water from places of plenty to places of scarcity. And so it's good, it's critical really to be an informed citizen, to know what they are. And so I'm going to guide you through this now, hands-on activity. Put your hands together, please. Bear with me. Where your hands come together is right at the heel of your hand. That's the bay. That's the San Francisco Bay, which leads out into the ocean, which is out by your elbows. Up where the pinkies come together, where the sort of ham of your hand is, that's the delta. That's just in the freshwater side, a little bit east of the bay. And the rivers are going to converge in that delta, which is basically the meaning of a delta, where rivers converge and go out to the sea. Your left thumb is north. Your right thumb is south. To the north, the main stem river of that system in the northern part of the Great Valley sequence is the Sacramento River. And attached to the Sacramento River is the McCloud, where we talked about that really, the really diverse and extraordinary assemblage of trout that developed in the McCloud, in part because of its isolation and in part because of the cold water habitat that was periodically connected to the ocean. So that's the Sacramento, the top of the Sacramento there. And then the next feather, and at the top of the Sacramento is a major dam. That's the Shasta Reservoir and the Keswick Dam at the foot of it, which has blocked access to the McCloud River and the Pitt River. The Pitt River is up there too. The Pitt allowed migrating salmonids, particularly winter run, to go all the way up into Oregon. And yeah, probably Oregon, not Nevada, but up into southeast Oregon, all the way up there to migrate before coming back down on the Tribs on the Pitt River. So the next major reservoir, Feather River. Feather River is also on Oroville, is Oroville Dam, another major reservoir. The Shasta Reservoir is owned by the feds. The Oroville is owned by the state. The next major river is the Yuba. That's your middle finger, the Yuba. The Yuba has also some dams on it, mostly for regional use. It's also a beautiful place to go swimming when you want to escape the valley, because it was heavily gold mined. And the sediment, mostly hydraulic minings, and the sediments have rolled down the Yuba River and formed these fantastic, sort of fantastical landscapes of boulders and green pools, and it's become this completely altered novel landscape. It still has native fishes in it, even a few salmon, and lots of people. So that's the Yuba River. The American River is the river that you know through Sacramento. The Cosumnes River is south of Sacramento, and it's the only undammed river in this system. There's only one, and it's a tiny little river called the Cosumnes. The Cosumnes also is kind of miraculous because it has these historic floodplains. Talked about the floodplains before. Most of them have been lost in California. Cosumnes still has its intact. Your other pinky is the Mokelumne, and the Cosumnes flows into the Mokelumne, which then comes into the delta, an important source of fresh water. The Stanislaus was the last major dam that got dammed in this system. It was a free-running river until the 1970s. I think I got to raft down that in 1976, like a few months before it was dammed. The Tuolumne River is the river that goes all the way up into the Yosemite National Park. And in 1912, Congress passed the Raker Act because San Francisco wanted water. And so they allowed this river in a national park to become dammed, which set a kind of terrible precedent at the time. So the Tuolumne, and it basically flooded the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne, which is a lot like Yosemite. The Merced River comes out of Yosemite. These are both dammed. And then finally, on your thumb, if you're still hanging in there with me, my hands got tired. On your thumb is the San Joaquin River, which goes all the way down and up into the John Muir Wilderness. And actually looks on the map, the Tuolumne River looks like it's touching the Owens River. The Owens River, which I showed in that picture of Graben and Horst, on the other side of the valley. Looks completely remote, but up in the headwaters there, they're just on one side or the other of the ridge, almost touching. And then somewhere down by your knee or your foot are these weird terminal rivers of the San Joaquin Valley. The Kings, the Kauai, and the Tule, and the Kern River. Remember the Kern River trout assemblage, rainbow trout? It's fabulously golden trout. They're all down there and they're isolated periodically. This little thing right here, this little square down here, that's Tule Lake. Tule Lake, from the before times, would flood up annually and was a major stop on the Pacific Flyway for waterfowl. And would essentially flood what normally would sort of be a desert landscape. It would all flood up with water. Many thousands of acres would flood up. And during those times, it would connect to the San Joaquin River, allowing connectivity. And then it would dry up again in the summers or during droughts, which would allow the isolation. And that punctuated connectivity and opening combined with isolation allowed the speciation to occur, which made those sorts of extraordinary trout possible. The San Joaquin also is the highest part of the Sierra Nevada. The rivers that go up off the San Joaquin go up into the highest part of the mountain range, which means that they're both inaccessible and also the coldest water regions there. And that's the site where the springers on the San Joaquin River used to dominate, when they could get up the San Joaquin River and then wait at the base of each one of those rivers on your right hand that we just talked about. They would wait down there in those plunge pools. And then when it started to rain, the first rains of the year, they would scram up as high as they could into those high elevation rivers to try to carry out their life cycle. The San Joaquin River, back on this, all these the fingers connect to the thumbs, right? So back towards the delta on the San Joaquin River, by 1920, the San Joaquin River no longer ran. It wasn't because of dams. It was really because they hadn't been put in yet. It stopped running because of agricultural diversions. The land down there was so incredibly rich. People wanted to farm it. They made fortunes on it, and the water stopped running. And when the water stopped running, the largest salmon fishery in the world collapsed. And those were spring run salmon. They basically collapsed because they could no longer get back and forth because, they'd come up in spring and they try to make it through the summer. And that was totally counter to their life history requirements because ag was pulling all the water out. And that's really the state of the San Joaquin today too. There's been a lot of effort to try to restore stretches of the San Joaquin River and to make it run at key times. But basically the San Joaquin still kind of poops out around the bottom end of it. And so I'm not sure what the fate of the restoration is there because of that main constraint. Maybe eventually we'll get it back, but it seems like a long call. So that's the Sacramento San Joaquin province. Any questions about that? I tried to break it down. This is why that question was just sucked. It's because I didn't tell you about all this, and I didn't realize that, like, baseline knowledge. I'm just really steeped in it, and so I think I really lacked how complicated, I lacked understanding of how complicated it was. And so I apologize for that. But now at least you've got a taste of it. And so I think I've talked about most of this, the San Joaquin Sacramento province. I've talked about its large size, its complex geologic history. So this is an interesting thing. It's got 17 endemic species if you go by genus species. But if you count all the different runs that we've talked about and the subspecies, then you're up to 40, 50. And what drives that, again, is this is a region in tectonic chaos, right? So every, 10 to million years to 10,000 years, something crazy happens in the landscape. And so as the suite of species starts to settle in and radiate into the existing habitat, something crazy goes down, like it's another volcanic eruption, and suddenly where there was a mountain, it's a lake, like in Clear Lake, it's a giant caldera. I think that blew about 5 million years ago, not that long ago, really. And so Clear Lake, the remains of the caldera are on what are Mount Canocti, on the southern rim of it. And so if your species trying to evolve these habitats, suddenly the habitat's not there. Or the glaciers are receding and it's opening up stuff. But then they dry up because it's a megadrought. And as a result, we have this really young fauna. It's full of endemism because there's been these opportunities for evolution into these newly emerging habitats. And then boom, something crazy geologically happens and that's gone. And so then they start, they retreat, the species retreat and they start evolving again. And so we have this kind of series of setbacks. This is really different than the East Coast, for example, which is just leftover stuff from Pangea. It's really ancient rocks out there. You have really low level, low relief landscapes. These, you don't have the giant mountains of the West. And so you have these really ancient, really competitive species like the catfish, like the centrarchids that you listened to on Friday, Andrew's lecture. That stuff's had millions and millions and millions of years to evolve. And that's why they're such great competitors when they get here to California. They basically just kind of like us humans. We just come in and take advantage of the locals. So back to this question. There's no way out. Your participation grade today, and I just want you to turn to somebody that you're sitting next to, strike up a conversation, and try to describe in words, out loud, the qualitative differences among these 4 different runs, and focus on the way the portfolio effect optimizes evolutionary success. And if you're at home and you're doing it on chat, then you can either chat it out, or you can talk to somebody. You should be enabled to actually have conversations on the chat that I can't hear. So take a few minutes to do this. I'm going to give you time in class right now because I think we just really need to be able to discuss it. So turn around, find somebody to talk to. Don't be afraid. You got about 5 minutes to nail it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We got about a minute. And I got a minute to wrap up. Okay, I gotta interrupt now because I got just a minute to wrap up. So the moral of today's talk, lecture, pontification is that you all are like among the most, you know, this is one of the best classes I've ever taught. I've taught a bit. And you all, as UC students, are among the most talented people in the States. So don't let my, I'm not trying to point out your failures because they're not failures. The things you need to work on is very different. You all are extremely talented, really bright people. And I really hope that you take advantage of the R1 University opportunities here by getting yourself deeply involved in a laboratory. You're voting citizens. So talk to your departments, talk to your representatives, and discuss the challenges of being at a great university. It's in our interest. And the final thing is that life is short and time is long, and it's impossible to understand geologic time. It's really challenging to understand evolutionary time, but we try to make simple models in our minds that we can communicate these out of body, out of existence experiences. And that's what I'm asking you to do. And I hope you made a little progress on that today. Thanks for indulging me. Have a good week. I'll see you on Friday in person.